Welcome to Question It, the podcast where we rethink health, wellness, and personal growth. I'm Kevin, your host, chief inquisitor, and sometimes guinea pig, exploring fresh paths to a better life. Let's dive into today's episode and get started. In this episode of Question It, we're exploring the idea of equality and peace, and I think it is a particularly poignant topic today, especially given the global climate and how the state of affairs is not just in America, but around the world. And I don't have a specific title for this episode yet, but this one is really near and dear to my heart. And I'm using an article that I wrote back in 2020 during the pandemic. And it's really based on a period piece, the Outlander series, which, truth be told, I haven't even gotten through the second season of that series. But there was a scene that really touched me. It really triggered me, if you will. And hopefully this episode doesn't need a trigger warning. But just in case, there could be some pretty heavy topics going on here. And it really is important. And I hope you'll listen to the end. I hope it'll get you thinking. Because it really boils down to how we human beings value each other as human beings. And, even though the state of America is where it is right now with a lot of divide, us versus them, I think this piece really speaks a lot to that point. And I'm really just trying and find a way to move forward as a species, as a country, as a people. And I hope this helps get people thinking more and perhaps drives us to rethink how we treat our fellow human beings, even how we treat each other within our own families and schools and businesses and all. So the original article, which I'll link in the show notes, is titled "Equality and Peace Fail When Superiority Reigns." Thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, I've had the opportunity to watch many TV series and movies, and one genre I very much enjoy is period pieces. I love to think about times past and how people lived, especially in the day-to-day. Not just taking note of the big events, but rather the more ordinary experiences of everyday life in that time. In a recently watched episode of Outlander, Season 1, Episode 6, from September 13, 2014, there was an exchange between a British officer and Scottish war chieftain of the Clan Mackenzie in 1743. In this scene, the war chieftain is attempting to safeguard an Englishwoman and guest of his clan who has been invited to dine with British officers. From the start, the British insult and demean the Scotsman, most certainly treating him like the second-class human Brits believe all Scots to be. As the exchange wraps up, it goes like this. Brit: "Well, it's been a delight meeting you, but I'm afraid the venison is losing its heat." Brit: "I would ask you to join us, but as you can see, no room." Brit: "Beastly sorry." Scot: "You can keep your scraps. They're still serving good Scottish ale in the tap room. I'll be downstairs." Brit: "How are we ever going to make peace with such an ill-mannered people?" It's easy to see from this exchange the Brit has no intention of extending hospitality to the Scot, and his sarcasm is a further insult and acknowledgement of how little value the Brit regards the Scot. In an attempt to save face and not acknowledge the emotional pain of being unwanted, unvalued, and not belonging to the superior nation, the Scot states he prefers the Scottish taproom downstairs anyway. After the Scot leaves, the Brit boasts further his position of superiority with a statement about how ill-mannered the Scot people are and how peace is not possible with such a lesser people. I find this exchange fascinating and as true in 2021 and now 2024 as it was 278 years ago. As I see it, humanity will never experience peace if one nation, group, or person continues to believe they're superior to another. Choose your conflict over superiority. British over Scottish, men over women, white over black, black over Asian, Christian over Jew, Republican over Democrat, Democrat over Republican, West Coast over East Coast, Maryland over Virginia, New York City over Los Angeles, heterosexual over homosexual, vegetarian over carnivore, weightlifter over endurance athlete, Manchester United over Liverpool, hard sciences over the humanities, boss over employee, teacher over student, parent over child, and the list goes on. Since the Brit believes himself to be a superior human, then he expects the inferior Scot to bow down and submit to him. And when he does not, the Brit believes the Scot is ill-mannered and unreasonable, which reinforces his belief of superiority because the low-life Scot won't agree to his station. In other words, you'll only be considered valuable in some regard if you acknowledge my superiority. Meanwhile, the Scot, holding the inferior status, or more likely less power, army, money, and land, is kept in his position without a shred of offered respect, which reinforces his position. Still, he knows he's as good as any Brit, yet he must reconcile that is not the view of those in power who are claiming their superiority. It's easy to claim superiority when you hold the power and resources. Another example that comes to mind, sadly, is how often police officers take this superiority position over citizens, and if their position of authority and power is not recognized immediately and without question, physical violence and even death too often ensues. Heck, even questioning an officer's actions or comments can get you arrested or shot. Sadly, no progress toward equality or peace is possible if the people in power continue to operate in a way that reinforces this false belief of higher value within the species. By claiming the other people's inferiority, example, the Scots' ill-mannered ways, and their superiority, equality simply is not possible. For equality and peace to exist, there is no superiority or inferiority of peoples. At what point will humanity recognize we are all one species and no subgroup is better or worse than another? While each have our own strengths and weaknesses, we are all Homo sapiens and there is no superior or inferior subgroup of people. When we perpetuate this myth by assuming this position, then our species as a whole suffers. A rising tide lifts all boats. That's a famous quote I've heard. If we continue to assume we are better and they are worse, and we act accordingly, then little will improve our humanity. Division will grow, relationships will degrade further, and will continue to hurt each other and ourselves. In Outlander, given the Brit assumes his superiority, the only way he will be satisfied emotionally and believe peace is possible is if the Scot agrees and concedes his inferiority. Since the Scot knows he is not inferior and likely takes the position his people are actually superior to the Brits, even if they do not have the power, money, land, etc., then in order to compensate for that emotional attack, that is, an attack of his people's value as a species, he assumes their own superiority, thereby perpetuating the cycle. It's simply a no-win scenario for humanity at large when we continue to proclaim our superiority over others. And the more people believe they are superior, the more destructive, often by physical force, their behaviors tend to be in order to maintain that superior position. All the while, I submit, it is more likely each person's own individual feelings of inferiority driving them to attach and associate with a group's perceived superiority, if at all possible? What if each and every person felt valued because they are valuable as a human being, and all of humanity operated with this simple understanding? What if we each took it upon ourselves to seek out, understand, recognize, and acknowledge the value each person we interact with has? What would it take to discover another person's gifts rather than assume their uselessness and your superiority? What if we operated from a position of assumed value and positive intent? How might our world be different? How might you behave differently if equality truly existed within our species? So that's a blog post or article that I wrote 4 years ago, and it just seems even more poignant today because we're still pitching one person, one group, for whatever reason, over another. And when one group is deemed more valuable or superior than another, and the other group is deemed inferior or less valuable, that hurts. And I know it might sound simple and plain because it's not like getting hurt with a gunshot or getting punched in the face, but emotional pain is just as relevant and it matters just as much as physical pain. And now that our species is able to survive physically because we know how to procure food and shelter, what we're doing to each other is emotionally attacking and demeaning because we're still operating from this survival state. But if we all actually work together and saw each other's value, recognized each other's value, no matter what your background, no matter who you are, then it raises everybody's emotional health state higher. And what I have found over the last 20 years of digging into human behavior is that how valuable we feel translates to how loved we feel. And I understand love might sound all woo-woo and warm and fuzzy, but love is actually a basic human need. Love is as basic a human need as air and shelter and sleep and food and water. And until we recognize that our basic needs, even love, and I'm not talking about romantic love, that when we nurture our most basic foundational needs, everything in life gets better for ourselves and the people around us. And that can propagate from our group to the next group, to the next group, and it all overlaps and it grows. So I'm hoping that with this episode, we can begin to think of why it's so important to value people and find out what unique qualities they have that you might not have. And it doesn't mean they're better or worse. It doesn't mean you're better or worse. It just means that we're different, and that's okay. Because when we come together and when we bring our differences together, that's when we're most likely to thrive. That's how we have been operating for thousands of years. And if we're going to continue to exist as a species, if we don't come together and work together in this way, then we're literally just going to kill ourselves off. Okay, so that was a little low note to end on, but hopefully the point is coming across, and we're seeing that everyone is valuable for the unique energy that they are in this universe. So I hope that gives you a lot to think about. I hope you'll join a deeper conversation by joining this episode's uchiTribe. Just go to the show notes and you can sign up. It's all free there, and hopefully we can continue the conversation through the Uchi app. Okay, until next time, peace, love, and connect. Thanks for joining me on Question It. Remember, growth happens outside your comfort zone, so keep experimenting and embracing change. If you enjoyed this episode, connect with me in the show notes, leave a 5-star review, and request to join this episode's uchiTribe. Until next time, peace, love, and connect.